Presbyterian Church has a role in this because we believe that this is an issue that is at the core of our humanity. It is not about, it's not about what your politics is, about your humanity. Okay? And so, thank you for whatever part you play on, wherever you're on the political spectrum, you're welcome here. We just want to affirm that this is an issue of humanity, and I'm so glad that Mother Agapia is here with us. This is her first time in Arkansas, and so would you please welcome her with an Arkansas welcome. The President Chris Jones, who is here. I don't do that because he's a politician. I do it because he's a person who believes in the humanity of all people. And Chris has not cherry-picked his humanity. He has been inclusive and welcoming. So, Chris, thank you for being here. Now, let me get out of the way and welcome Dr. Ali Khan to, as he wonderfully does, take the mic and begin this conversation. You know that the rest areas are off to my right, your left, just beyond the vestibule, and you're welcome. Let me ask you if you would please silence or mute your phone devices so that they will not distract the recording or distract the speakers. I'll do the same thing because I will be the offender if I don't. My phone will go off, and then you'll look at me and say, hypocrite. Dr. Khan.
Yes, sir.
You got the mic.
Thank you. So we have the deep honor of welcoming Mother Agapia to Little Rock. She is an Orthodox nun who was born in the U.S. into a Greek Orthodox lineage, to a family with a rich background in Christian missionary work and ministry. In 1996, I believe, Mother Agapia moved to the convent of St. Mary Magdalene in Jerusalem, remaining in that community for over a decade. And in September 98, she began running the convent's Orthodox Girls' School of Bethany. She spent decades living and working in the Holy Land, especially in the West Bank town of Bethany. Over the years, she has become a vocal advocate for the besieged Christian Palestinians, focusing especially on the lived reality of the brutal occupation. To her, the Christian presence in the Holy Land is not merely a tourist attraction or a tourist concern, but a living witness to the gospel in an occupied land, trying to survive and fight erasure. To me, as a Muslim who was educated for 12 years by Catholic nuns and being partnered with a Catholic person, she represents what happens when faith in God is not just professed, but lived. She carries the strength that is like a light that shines in New Millennium Church, in the churches in the Holy Land, and also in a few mosques that I find comfort in. There are Jews, Christians, Muslims here, as you can see, our Abrahamic cousins, and we all welcome you to Little Rock. Now, we wanted to structure it fairly informally, so I will begin with just a few questions, 5 or 6 questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience to ask questions. So think about some of the things that you have heard over the past 2 years or before, and questions that have rankled in your heart, and this is your opportunity, I think, to go about it. I've been obsessively researching your work, and I've heard, people talk about you, your own words as well. But starting with sort of your personal experience, when you first moved to Palestine, what were your expectations when you moved to Palestine, specifically of the Christian Palestinian community, and what was it that you saw, and how was that different?
Well, I think the first thing to realize is I went there, as a nun, and I had no thought about the Christians that were living there, to be quite honest. I was going for the monastic experience. On the Mount of Olives, our convent was a very well-run convent, and the first year I lived there, I barely went out the doors. So I knew nothing about the local community or about the situation. But so I guess I came without any expectations. And I had been a political science major in college. So I had some knowledge of Israel and Palestine, and I think I vaguely remembered even then that Yitzhak Rabin had been killed 6 months before I went there in May of '96. But that wasn't my purpose for going, to understand the political situation at that time. And I was maybe, even though I had been a poli-sci major, I was a little bit naive because I thought that everybody was working towards peace then. And the Oslo Accords were coming up, and it was all going to be an equitable solution. But that first year and a half, all I did, my life was prayer. Even though our convent, just to give you an idea of the location, right across was the Dome of the Rock, Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Wailing Wall. So basically the whole Abrahamic and Abraham, where he sacrificed his son, was right there. So, and the tomb of the Mother of God, who's important to Catholic and Orthodox Christians, was to my right. Up the hill was where Christ ascended into heaven. So that was the neighborhood. But to be honest, my neighborhood was in my heart, in my cell in prayer. But after a year and a half, there were some changes in our convent, and we had a school. It had started out as a clinic in the 1940s. I was part of the Russian church then, and they had a lot of property under the British mandate. And one of the properties was something that had been abandoned, and in the 1940s, a bishop was driving through, and he told the abbess at that time, I want you to take this building we have in Al-Azadiya and do something good for the community. And at that time, Bethany was a small village, and where Martha and Mary were from, where Lazarus' tomb is. Let's ingrain this for all Christians. And that's one thing, it's wonderful to see you all here today, but we're in the heart of the evangelical Christian area, of Christians, and what is hard, what is painful to me is that more Christians aren't willing to understand what's really happening to the Christian community in the Holy Land. In Jerusalem and in Bethlehem. So what happened was I was sent to run the school, so it started as a clinic, and mostly Bethany was a small village until 1967. And after 67, I think we have a couple of people here from Jerusalem. Many people, Muslim and Christian, from the old city of Jerusalem were forced out because of the Israeli occupation of Jerusalem, and they ended up, so Bethany became a much larger town. So the clinic that had grown into a boarding school for Christian girls, mostly from Bethlehem and Bethlehem area, which was only about 7 miles away, had now become a day school. And we had 300, when I was there, sent to the school, we had 350 girls, mostly Muslim, from the towns of Abu Dis and Al-Azadiya, which was Area B, which we'll get into a little bit about the politics of the situation. And we had the boarding students. And because we were Russian, we also had girls that came from the state of Israel. Because many Russians who have immigrated to Israel, they don't tell you this part. When Netanyahu tells you that Christians are doing fine in Israel, that the population is growing, no. 20% of the state of Israel are Palestinian background. Another 15 or 20% are people of Russian background who have emigrated to Israel over the years because one grandparent at least had Jewish lineage, and they had the right of return to go there for Jews. But a lot of those Jews actually had Orthodox Christianity in their family. So we had some girls who were Russian Orthodox living with us, who came from broken families. So I saw not only the situation of people in the West Bank, but of those like people from Haifa, from Tel Aviv, from Nachariya, the state in Israel. So got to know that situation. I guess the main thing just to say is that once I was in the school, I became ingrained in the community. The big thing is that, so then my realization of things changed. When I first went there, we were moving towards peace. This is September of 1998, and there was no wall at that time, and Israelis came to Jericho or came to Al-Azadiya to buy goods on a Saturday because they were cheap. And people in Bethany worked with Israelis on the other side. I wouldn't say everybody was buddy-buddy, but people knew and recognized each other. But things really began to change after September of 2000. And, well, I don't know, if you want me to go more or you want to ask a question? So I became aware of what was going on in Palestine, as opposed to just being quiet in the convent.
Right, right. So, the reality of the way the geography is changing in terms of access to the holy sites, access to hospitals, access to schools. Could you describe how the Christian community is faring in how the geography is changing, how the checkpoints are changing, in terms of access to these specific areas for the Christian community in Palestine?
Right. Yeah, so that was beginning to change. When you talk about, it's really the weapons of occupation, right? So when I first went to Al-Azadiya, the wall, I would drive one day in August of 2001, and all of a sudden there's big cement cubes in the wall on the street, and we can't use that road anymore to get where we are. So now, and then eventually they built what became a wall right next to Lazarus's tomb, barely a mile from the school. So now what happened was that I don't like to differentiate between Christian and Muslim, because in reality I think it affects every Palestinian there. Whether you're a Christian, if you live in Bethlehem, you can't go to the Holy Sepulchre, the tomb of Christ. You certainly can't go up to the north to Nazareth or to visit any relatives you might have there. And this was going on in the early 2000s, the beginning of that division of the land. And not only the division of land, the confiscation of land, and people not being able to move around, not being able to get, again, go back to the beginning, early 2000s at the school. It was the year after Arafat had died, and a boy, the brother of one of our students, he threw a rock towards the wall. And, Patrick Mahomes, a quarterback couldn't have thrown to reach the soldiers over there, but they shot him. And he wasn't killed, but he was, but the hospital was Makassid Hospital on the top of the Mount of Olives. And what happens is you have to go around 15 miles instead of the 2-mile direct trip there. And they stop, the ambulance first is inhibited from getting there, and then they eventually are able to pass through. And this is just a common situation. So it's difficult to get to medical care. We might have a clinic in Bethany, but you don't have a hospital. And you don't have, and whether you're Muslim can't get to Al-Aqsa Mosque, and a Christian can't get to the Holy Sepulchre, and to go to Bethlehem to Church of Nativity. Right now, it's gotten, in the early 2000s, you had the checkpoints and you had inhibition of travel. But what's happened now is that even within the Palestinian cities, they're creating more checkpoints. So people are having to make the choice. Here's Bethlehem, and I have my home in Bethlehem, but my work is in Ramallah, about 15 miles away. And now it can take up to 5 hours to make that trip in a day because of the checkpoints. And so what's happening is people are having to decide, do I keep my job or do I keep my home? So that's how it affects everybody in the life there. And what's worse is that beyond just the difficulty of traveling is the direct persecution of Christians and recognizing them as Christians. I was just in Palestine a month ago, middle of September, was meeting with a bunch of women, friends of friends, having coffee on a Sunday night, and each of them had a story about how they had been treated at the checkpoint. One family, relatively wealthy, from Bet Jala, which is next to Bethlehem, had gone to Jericho on a Sunday afternoon. Because they have swimming pools there, it's kind of a place to relax with their young children, with their family. They're coming back. They can't use the nice roads that Israeli settlers use to go between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. You take a steep road, it's called Wadi Nar, the Valley of Fire, that connects the Jericho and Bethany where we are to lead you to Bethlehem. And within there's checkpoints. And so they were stopped at a checkpoint, and they thought they would be able to pass through, and then the soldier stops them. The woman says again, wait a second. Give me your crosses. Give me your icons. Those are religious images that people have on their car. And now give me a piece of tissue paper. She wraps them up and throws them in the garbage right in front of them. So that was like not just a Muslim or a Christian, it was pointedly against a Christian. We don't want you here. And actually, though, a year before, now I'm thinking about it, I was up in the northern West Bank. I'm very close to a Christian community there. And I had been in Jordan, and the priest was newly from Jordan, serving the community in the northern West Bank. So living in Jordan, they have much more freedom. The Christians are supported by the government. They're about 10% of the population. They have large churches and things. And he wasn't used to being mistreated. So we're driving to Agapia, to a town near Jenin, and we have to pass through a checkpoint. And he's like, ha ha ha, like there's about 5 cars in front of us, and it took us literally 45 minutes to have those 5 cars pass through the checkpoint. But as it's our turn, the soldiers, heavily armed, are there, and he was a rather large man and had a big cross on his belly. And I was so taken aback, I didn't have my camera at first, the soldier grabbed his cross and started flipping it like this. And I had never seen that kind of thing where and this was a year ago, but that's what I mean, it's been increasing where now they're directly targeting Christians. Probably you've heard the stories about the spitting that always went on, the graffiti, but there's been specific actions against Christians in terms of on the institutions by increasing. Here we have tax-exempt status for the churches. There they're trying to put pressure on the church by saying we're going to tax anything that's not directly a church, that's part of the church property, and we're going to not only do that, but we're going to back tax you for the last 15 years. So if that were to go into, that's a legislation that they want to pass in the state of Israel. If they were to do that, they would basically bankrupt the churches. The churches which support the schools, like Ali mentioned, where he was in Pakistan even, Catholic nuns be his teachers at the school. All throughout Palestine, many of the schools are operated and sponsored by churches, whether they're Catholic or Orthodox or Lutheran. Hospitals are sponsored by them. Nursing homes are sponsored by them. So if they do these attacks against the church through taxation, another way they do it is that just like the Russian church, the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate were large landowners within what is now Palestine and Israel. For example, the land of the Knesset, the parliament, is actually leased from the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate. But what the state of Israel has been doing the last few years is to say, to try to bargain with them on the leases and say, if you don't accept the new terms, well, don't matter, we're going to take the property anyway. So they have the power, sort of the power of the occupation. They're the ones in power, and they can make the laws to do it. And that's what's been going on.
And I have many friends who've gone to Israel, the Holy Land, sort of tours. And the impression that I get when they come back is that they see nothing of that. Right. Are these tours for American Christians that go to the Holy Land, how are they operating if they're not seeing any of this?
Well, because you have the segregation between the two. First of all, I think a lot of Christian groups, they'll go in and out of Bethlehem very quickly. So they might see the wall now and the checkpoints, but they'll get out of the bus and a group of 50 people, they run into the Church Nativity and they come back out. If they even go there, because a lot of Protestant groups, they won't go to the Holy Sepulchre, which Orthodox and Catholic consider to be where Christ was crucified and where he was buried and rose from the dead. It's all in one big complex. They have something a little bit outside. I guess what it is that it's such an experience to go to the Holy Land. I've noticed even when I'll pick up people at the airport and you drive the 25 miles to come from Tel Aviv to the Jerusalem area, I recognize that these big white buildings with red roofs are the settlements, and that what the people don't see is that on the side of the road 443 that goes into Jerusalem, there's a barrier there. That you sort of see trees and mountains in the distance, but you probably, as you're going down the highway, you don't see the cement cubes that are blocking it, and the men that are 4 in the morning, the few that can get through if they have a permit to go into Israel to work, how they've been lining up, and how they can't drive their car into their town you're zipping by on the highway but don't realize what's going on behind there. So I don't know how else to describe it, except it's a new experience for people. Most times when you come to the Holy Land, you're there for the religious experience, and there's so many different things to see. And especially if you're an American and haven't traveled very much, just the terrain is different, and so they just don't pick up those cues. And they don't go. I'm ashamed to say even many my groups, they do go, but many Orthodox Christian groups, they'll go to the major holy site, but they won't visit with the local Christians or go to a local Christian parish, so you don't really get a real feel of what their life is like. You go to that holy site, which is run, there'll be a priest or a monk there, and they might be from a different country. And so you don't get the sense of what the local people are going through, or how you don't go to a church service and see the daily life of those people. Yeah.
And I think you touched on this a little bit. The other thing that, for me and my family that's been involved in this for generations, something that I think surprises my friends and family over here is the apartheid system, like of these IDs. You know, of IDs. So if you have a blue ID, if you have a green ID, and if you have a white ID, does that apply to Palestinians as a group, Muslims and Christians? And could you describe that a little bit, what the system of IDs is?
Yeah. I think before the ID, what we really have to do is to people aware. My big frustration is that whenever we hear that there was had been a terrorist attack or something, we think that came out of the blue. These Palestinians are just all they think about is violence and killing Jews and Israelis. We have to really understand what that land is, that holy land, what it's become. There's a state of Israel, and after 1967, there was a decision, we have the Green Line, okay? We'd already, people who lost their land in 48, but what Palestine was, when I said about the politics not being aware, the Oslo Accord said there's going to be an area A, B, and C. Palestine, you're not really a state. So when they say that how come the Palestinians don't take care of themselves and how come they're not stopping these people from doing these acts, it's sort of like trying to govern with your hands behind your back. Because, and I can only describe from my own experience, so we lived in Area B, and that meant that Area A was an area with, supposedly the Palestinians had a mayor, they had a police department, not fully armed, and sort of could function as a government. And those were the big metropolitan areas of Hebron, Ramallah, Bethlehem, Jericho, Tulkarm, and Jenin up in the north. I think that's all of them, Hebron. But even within that, Israel would go in with their military all the time. And then Area B, where we lived, so in May of 2000, where we lived, we had a mayor, but there was no police department, there was no fire department. If I remember clearly, one time there was a fire on the outskirts of the school, the wall had already been built, and so from East Jerusalem, no fire department could come through. The settlement of Mali Adumim was behind us, and at that time it was like the size of a small city. Now it reaches out almost 20 miles to Jericho, the expanse of that settlement and continued ones. But those people wouldn't be bringing their fire trucks into us, so men were in there with hoses and buckets of water trying to stop a fire. And so what I'm saying is there's a lack of governance. I remember one time we had a problem, someone wanted to take a piece of our land, because they had squabbles over property lines, and the guy who was trying to take the land, he flashed a gun, and I know that he was working as an Israeli informer. The police department that we had no guns, no weaponry, so no way to enforce any kind of law that there was there. May of 2000, we were told that Abu Dis, the town next to us in Al-Azadiya, were going to be elevated to become Area A and given more authority and governance. No, Ehud Barak was the prime minister at that time, and they made an excuse and said, no, we can't comply with the agreement right now. So the thing is, and part of going on is that not only were the Palestinian hopes of having a government being taken away, is that at the same time the settlements were being built. So settlements, imagine a settlement is a house with a red roof, and Israelis are moving into West Bank land. I picture it as, what if those were all tanks? So literally the Israelis were continuing a war the whole time. So when you heard that there was a suicide bomb where somebody got through and shot an Israeli, why was he doing that? Not because he hated the Israeli. He hated the fact that his land was being taken, and he's trying to fight for his land to do that. So the apartheid system, when you build the settlements, what you do with American tax dollars. My goodness, how much money has been put into. When I came to the Holy Land, if you talk about what my desire was, if anything, or over the years after I left, bringing pilgrims there, was to be able to experience visiting the holy sites where Christ was and worship at those sites and make that a part of your life. In the Orthodox Christian, we have a saying that the visiting a pilgrimage to the Holy Land is like the fifth gospel. It so much opens up the truth of Christ to you, the awareness of him. And how painful it's been for me the last time I moved there in 96. As the settlements got built, they had the infrastructure for it. They built new roads, they build electric lines, they take the land where the water aquifers are. I think most of you are probably aware, if you live in Bethlehem or in Taiba or up in Jenin, maybe you'll get water coming through your pipes twice a week. If you're lucky. And Israel controls all that and all the settlements around it. So that's part of the apartheid system. The other is those roads that now connect all the settlements bypass. If you're a Palestinian, you have a white and green license plate, and you're not allowed to go on those roads. If you are Palestinian and you lived in Jerusalem, it's a little bit of a complicated system. They have something called the Jerusalem ID, and they have a little bit more rights. They're not full citizens of Israel, but they have a few more rights, and they're allowed to have a car with yellow plates, so they can go on the roads that a settler would go on. But, so that's the system, is that to divide the two. And not only the roads, but also tunnels, and now you have the walls and the fences. The Holy Land is scarred by all this. And that's what's so painful too. If people really care for the land and see it as a sacred land, what they're doing is trying to, through this infrastructure of the settlements and all of everything that goes with it, they're basically wiping out anything that's sacred about the land and anything that gives you a sense of wholeness and connectedness to it. When it's the reality of the apartheid system is to pretend the other people don't exist. And right now where I live in Al-Azadiya, first they built the wall next to Lazarus's tomb. That made it impossible for us to get to the convent where I was from, to be able to pray there. And the same for a Muslim to be able to go to Al-Aqsa Mosque. Then you have the settlement behind us that is now huge. And so people from Bethlehem or from the south of Palestine have only one way, and it's actually through one road to go up to the northern West Bank. So that creates a lot of traffic jams in itself outside the checkpoints. Now what they're going to do, they call it E1 with this government, is to block off the road, the highway that leads from the settlement to Jerusalem, so Israelis and people with yellow plates will be able to go there, but Palestinians will not be able to get into Jerusalem. I don't even know how they create these types of things to make it work, and it's to pretend that these 30,000 people, and this is replicated everywhere in the West Bank, but I'm talking about Al-Azadiya, as if they don't exist. They're going to have a tunnel that go through them, and a bypass here, and using the highways and the tunnels to just sort of pretend there aren't these people there, these Palestinians, to make it a reality. But not just Palestinians in general. A bigger plan is when you talk about the attacks on Christians, where we lived at the St. Mary Magdalene Convent on the Mount of Olives. Directly next to us is another part of the mountain, and there's a spot, it's called Vera Galilee. It's where the apostles would gather, the Galileans, to talk to Jesus when they were in Jerusalem. There's a Greek church there. And from that point, going down the mount, I know part of that was Russian land, but apparently the Israelis are trying to confiscate it, leading to the old city walls to where the temple would be built. They want to build a big park. This is one of the ploys they use, sort of legal way. They say it's either military control now or it's been confiscated for the state as parklands. So they want to take it and basically wipe out the whole Muslim Christian experience in that area and turn it into one big park that will just be Judaized. And so they use these techniques to try to erase the other populations there.
The other question I had was, especially, I think this was, I don't know if it was August perhaps, the issue of Taiba.
Of
what happened in Taiba, yeah. That's biblical Ephraim,
Yes.
So, and Taiba, even in the Ottoman times, was a beautiful holy site. Like for us as well, for Muslims, it's holy as well. And we call it Taiba because it's the beautiful one,
Right.
or the holy one. Could you describe what happened in Taiba?
Yeah.
And especially, you know where we are, we're in Arkansas, and you know who our governor was, obviously.
The
So,
whole thing.
and you met him over there, and could you describe what happened in Taiba and the background of Taiba?
Right. Yeah. The very first thing is that it's a nice connection to Al-Azariah, to Bethany, because if you read John 11, chapter John chapter 11, the verses, Christ has raised Lazarus from the dead in Bethany. And then he goes out to Ephraim to sort of prepare himself for coming back to Jerusalem for the crucifixion that he knows is going to be happening very soon, and his whole trial going on. So it's a biblical significance there. And it's interesting you bring up, it's now called Taiba because I think when Saladin or when it came through, he said how beautiful and hospitable the people are there. So it took the Arabic name Taiba, the beautiful. And so it's known as Taiba now. And you have actually, it was considered basically a Christian town. There's 3 current churches there, Orthodox Catholic and Greek Catholic, as well as the ruins of a church from the 4th century, built by St. Helen. And that's the church that and just to illustrate, back in the 1990s, after the Oslo Accords came in, many Palestinian Americans or Palestinians from the diaspora went back to the West Bank with the hope that we can use our money and the business acumen we developed in the other countries and come back and help build a strong Palestine. So in Taiba, you have a brewery, a hotel, a distillery, and these are Palestinian Americans who made money in America and then came back and said, we want to make our homeland strong and prosperous. And what those people went through, they're stubborn. In Taiba, they're known as stubborn. Even all the obstacles that were put in their way. For example, they wanted to establish the brewery. You have to get your hops from imported, but you have to go through the port in Haifa, which is controlled by Israel, and they would keep things there for days on end. And then when they eventually got their beer made, when they wanted to bring it to Jerusalem, they were forced to drive down to Hebron, about an hour and a half away, go through various checkpoints, and then come back up north. Everything was done as an obstacle for people who wanted peace, who wanted to build an economy for the Palestinians to develop as a country that could be self-sufficient. Israel, over the years, I saw how they've made it extremely difficult for peace-loving people to try to establish. That's something that I think Americans have to understand, is that they want to create a strong country, and everything is put in their way not to do that. So we come to now Taiba. What part of this family had helped to build homes for 30 Christian families over the years. The woman, she wrote books. She'd go back to America, sell the books, Christina in the Holy Land, at different churches, and over the years they raised enough to have 30 new homes there. One day, settlers came in the area around, so you have the town of Taiba, but then you also have all the people in the town have olive trees. And so for acres of land on the outskirts of town, they had that property, but little by little, you had settlements maybe 2 miles away in each direction, but then settlers, armed settlers, were encroaching on the land. These settlers came into the town and set fire around the old church, the 4th century church. Now, and they also sprayed graffiti that said, Mujahir, I think, the town, you are next, a town nearby. And actually right now, that town is now under military occupation. The Israelis are not letting anybody in or out. And they uprooted like 20,000 olive trees from there about a month. So that's the kind of revenge. It starts with the religious zealots, the settlers, and the army and the government support those kind of actions. And the West Bank, and the land that's supposed to be Palestine. So after the fire on the church, it got attention because unfortunately Christians get a little bit of attention when something happens to them in the West. So Ambassador Huckabee, father of your current governor, went there as a show of support, supposedly, for the Christians there. And he went there and they talked to the people and said he was going to address this to the Israeli government. The only thing that he actually did as a point of action was, apparently at the same time, this is something I think important for evangelical Christians to understand, Israel only recognizes the sort of early churches, the Orthodox, the Catholic, and the Lutheran. They don't recognize Protestant churches.
Right.
You need a visa. You can't establish a community in Israel if you're a Protestant. Which and so they need a visa to come in, and they certainly can't do missionary work.
Right.
You're not allowed to do missionary work, but if they want to go, they need visas. And apparently there had been a problem with the state of Israel at this particular time a few months ago. So Ambassador Huckabee addressed that issue and told the Israelis, how come you're not letting our people come visit, or you're making it difficult for them to get visas? And I think they sort of relieved that problem for now. But he did nothing about not only the burning and the entrance of the settlers into town, but in a nearby town, I think a few days before that incident, Saif Musalat, a 20-year-old Palestinian American,
Yes.
born in Florida, raised in Florida, just like I'm a Greek American. It's very common for Greeks in the summer to go back to the Chodyot, to go back to their village and spend there. So why is it any different for a Palestinian, Muslim or Christian, to spend the summer in their cultural heritage, their roots? And that's what this young man was doing. He was out in the countryside, and settlers attacked him. This is a story that's just so common. I get not tired of telling it. I'm tired that it has to keep happening, because I can tell you it was happening 20 years ago. That this man was out, he was beaten by settlers to death, and this is the part that's continuing all the time, they inhibited ambulance from coming until they made sure that he was dead, and then they eventually will pick him up. And that's not, it sounds rare, but it happened in the last week.
Right.
Young boys that were killed,
Right.
and they stop, they wait, they don't let the ambulances come through until they can be assured that he's not going to survive going on. So in Taiba that happened. I was there September 15th. That was 6 weeks after the ambassador had been there. As it turns out, one young man from there, I had 4 girls from that town who had been in our school. They're now grown up. And their brother, who was 24, he's a mechanical engineering student at Berzait, and some friend came to him one day and said, I want to try for the green card lottery. And I said, can you help me fill out the form? I said, well, I'll do it too, Abdallah. So he does it. He ended up winning. So he's now living with me in upstate New York. He came in about a month ago. But after Ambassador Huckabee had come, another row, the houses of those Orthodox Christian families were sort of built in units of 3. And his family was poor. They didn't have a car. But the 2 other cars in the front of the houses were burned. And the graffiti is there on the wall again. And this time it says, how did they put it? Israel is alive in Taiba, and we're coming for revenge. So this has happened after the visit of Huckabee. There's been no response from the Israeli government. The attacks continue, and the killing continues.
And this is the question, like from an outsider. Even though I had 12 years of Catholic schooling, the dynamics that I see here in the evangelical church, it's almost as if the Palestinian Christians, they don't consider them Christians. Are they not the original Christians? Like, what is the dynamic when you speak to evangelical churches over here, or evangelical clergy, or even just Protestant Christians? What is your experience talking to them and trying to convince them of the humanity of the Palestinian Christians over there? I mean,
Right.
there must be a disconnect.
Right. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I haven't spoken to many evangelical churches. I've met different Christians, evangelicals. In fact, I remember one time I was ready to make a trip over, and I was at the Walmart shopping, and the lady was next, and I said, I'm getting ready for my trip. Oh, you're going to Israel, to the Holy Land. And isn't it so wonderful there, and how Israel, it's a wonderful country, and how they treat everybody. And I wanted to start to say something to her, but then I realized it's almost like a delusion.
Yeah.
So I really have to get from you people, because I'm Orthodox Christian. So to me, it's innate, even though, when I went there first to the Holy Land, I didn't have a lot of preconceptions, but I knew it was the land of Christ. I knew we had the Holy Fire, we had the Holy Sepulchre, we had the church in Bethlehem, Jacob's Well, Nazareth, Sea of Galilee. So it's certainly part of my life, but obviously not in the same way as an evangelical Christian. And I actually really can't answer that, because I don't know how to break that delusion, that idea that, what I get from is there's a number of young men who have helped become priests who are now serving in Bethlehem and up in the north, and they have such a sense of humor in spite of all that they're suffering. And Father Isa, who's in Bethlehem, said, I don't get the people come up to me and they say, when did you convert to Christianity? And he just looks at him. He's been living, my family has been here for centuries. And we're Christians. And I don't know how to explain the disconnect. If you sing "O Little Town of Bethlehem," well, who was in Bethlehem, right? The Christians. But obviously there's a theology that's grown up that ties into this idea that not understanding what Israel is. If you're an Orthodox or a Catholic, or the new Israel is Christ came. He's the Messiah. He's the new Israel. And that he's the fulfillment of everything we should be. So somehow there's been a disconnect there. And I think it's just a matter of education to make people understand that you're coming to to the land where Christ was. If you're going around the Sea of Galilee, and Palestinians are there as well. It's their land.
So, you described the system of apartheid, that is, it's a system of land seizure, a system of erasure, changing it's almost terraforming, changing the geography.
Absolutely.
What is it doing to the Christian community in Palestine? Yeah. Can they escape? How do they look at their future?
Well, I was just there, I guess, and the problem is, obviously, the priests all register their concern. First of all, let's get a misconception out of the way. I think Benjamin Netanyahu was quoted a few weeks ago saying the Israelis are the best friends of the Christians. It's really under the Muslims that they've had to leave. The percentages changed. No, point of fact, it was right after 1948 when the population of Christians dramatically changed. They were dispersed all over some to be the West Bank, but many to other countries. Okay, so that was the huge cutting of the Christian population. And then it's relatively the same, but the problem is not the Muslims or the Palestinians. The problem is both are under occupation. Everybody, they care about their children. So if you don't have a job, if your child can't continue his education, then you think about leaving. And so that's why in the last couple of years too, we've seen even a greater number, though it's been slowly, the Christian community has diminished. And now, when I was there this time, saying, we had 5 families leave and another 10 that are trying to leave. And when you're only talking about maybe 100,000 altogether in the West Bank, but it's certainly getting smaller, every family that leaves makes a big difference. And they're not allowed to work. So they're leaving because it's impossible to live under the situation. But they don't want to live. I brought just 2 young women. I didn't really do a pilgrimage, but in this September, 2 young men came in from America on the trip for the experience. And we had already been in the northern West Bank. We were now in Nablus, where a young man I know had just been, I'll just say about him too, Father Daoud. He's a young man I know. His family has always been very hospitable to us. He went to Cyprus to study to be a priest. And he got married, which you do in the Orthodox tradition, and became a priest. He now serves in Nablus, the community there. His classmate, Father Silas, is from Haifa, is an Israeli citizen. He chose not to get married, but to become a monk, but he also became a priest in April of 23. His first assignment in August of 23 was to Gaza, to the Church of St. Porphyrius. So he's now still in Gaza. And I guess I'm digressing a little bit, but the story is so poignant. We talked to him when I was there in September, and at that point, the Christian communities, I've been there before, so the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, the Baptist, and the hospital, they're all very much in the same neighborhood, same area. But everybody's home there has been destroyed, or at least partially destroyed, so they've all taken refuge in the churches. And they've been attacked as well, people killed there. But relatively speaking, they were better off than most of Gazans, because at least there was some shelter and probably a little bit better of food resources. But at this point in Gaza, there was a heavy bombing going on in northern Gaza where they were at that point. His voice was like one of, and they were not lucky to have one meal every 2 days. And besides the people that were killed in direct missile attacks, many people in the community had died because of lack of medication, some cases lack of water, lack of food. And so this had just been a continual decrease of the population there. But you admire him because and I remember a year into it, he asked to be relieved of his duty, to be able to go back to Israel. But then he thought better of it because I think his conscience could live with it. Here, I have my people here, how can I live? He could go back, but I don't think he could live in peace in doing that. But this day in September, with the heavy bombing, when we called him, we were up in Nablus at a refugee camp, and they were prepared to die that day. They just expected that this is what's going to happen. But more than that was the fact that they were at the point where not only do we expect to die because of the bombing, but almost the weariness that, Lord, please let us die, because how much more of this can we take? That's so much that they've gone through. And now I forgot what we were addressing originally.
In terms of, what has happened to the Christian community?
Yeah, so many people, so I was in Nablus at Father Daoud's parish. There were 20 young people there, college age, and we were having, after the Vesper service in the evening, we had a meal, and we're sitting and talking. And one of them finally, I said, well, how many of you want to leave? And one of them kind of raised his hand finally and said, well, I'm studying medicine and I want to go to Germany now to continue my studies, and there's no future here. And then timidly, the rest of them kind of saying the same thing, how can we have a future here? But then the young Americans spoke to them and said, guys, we know it's difficult, but you don't know what you're missing if you were to leave here. Because in spite of the persecution, in spite of the difficulties, there's something about the family connectedness, the warmth of the Palestinian hospitality. I don't know how to explain it, but it's something we should also recognize as people that we're missing in this Western world. It's like, I guess I focus it now, it's sort of a timelessness. If you go to any family in Palestine, no matter what's going on, the persecution or stuff, please come have coffee, come tea, and if you don't, they'll really be offended. Right. And they have the whole day for you. And I recognized at first when I was going through, you still have the shepherds, and there's a sense that we're in the time, the way that God created this world. And you live by the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun, and you're connected to the land. And even if these people now have professions, there's still such this sense that we're not governed by the clock. We're governed by our connection to other human beings. Mm-hmm. And so those young people could now go to the US or to Germany or whatever. They might have a good job. They might have a nice home. But I think they're going to lose something too, and it's something that we can learn from them. And what they've gone through in their persecution and their oppression is how to live as human beings and how to endure. And I think there's such a strength of spirit there that we can learn from. So they are leaving, but they do want to stay, ultimately. They recognize the preciousness of it. And especially for the Christians, I never have the more close experience to God when I've been in churches in Palestine, because Americans can be a little more sophisticated and we know things, but there it's like it comes from the heart. I think I had said in an interview, where I lived on the Mount of Olives, it's where Christ came from. He got on the donkey and he came down the Mount of Olives, and they came out with the branches, Hosanna in the highest. And it was as if the children calling out to God, and the stones, the living stones. And that's what you feel like when you're at a church service there. They may not be sophisticated in theology, but it's like because they're from the land of Christ, they feel it in their bones and in their soul, and it's like they're talking to him when they're there. And it's such a precious thing. And so I think it would be such a great loss if we lose those living communities, because when we lose the living communities, then the churches also just become museums, which is very much what the state of Israel, that's very much the plan, they want the tourism. So they want you to come on your buses and come through and put your money in the coffer and use an Israeli tour guide to go visit these different sites. But they don't want you to worship there. They don't want you to worship at the Muslim sites and feel what it's really all about. Like when we go on our trips, on our pilgrimages, we often visit Constantinople, Istanbul as well, and you see the great Hagia Sophia. And so for a Christian, that's painful. It's a museum and a mosque. And so, but the museum aspect of it is that these living places of prayer, when they become something else, all of humanity loses in that. And so I think what Christians have to be aware of, we're losing our legacy in the Holy Land, both by the Christians not being able to live there, having it difficult for them to live there, and also by the taking over of the holy places as just becoming sort of a Disneyland type thing rather than living places of prayer.
So this one last question that I want to open up to the audience is, you mentioned Gaza. From a Palestinian Christian perspective, what is the perception of what was going on before October 7th, what happened October 7th? How is that perceived by the Christian community in Palestine, the native indigenous Christian community?
By the Palestinian?
By the Christian Palestinian perception. Over here, for example, you know, when I try to talk to an American Christian, you hit a roadblock. Basically, the entire idea of what happened in the past 2 years started on October 7th. And before that, there was just everything was fine. There was birds flying around, and there was bread in the oven. What is the lived reality over there, or especially from a Christian perspective, of what is happening in Gaza?
Still not quite, of the Christians there?
Yeah.
I think,
Or just the Palestinian experience in general.
yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's no different. You know, it was horrific what happened on October 7th, but the thing is, what happened on October 6th and then the years before, and for any Palestinian, whether they're in Gaza or the West Bank, life has not been easy to live. So, I mean, I didn't have a lot of experience with Gazans, but the fact is, I know many people were educated and they would try to come out to travel and to work, and they simply weren't allowed to. It's still like an open air prison. That hasn't changed in any way, shape, or form. So it was just the intensity of the attack rather than anything greatly different in their lives.
So we would open it up to questions. I think we have these mics over here. Whoever would like to ask a question, please.
Thank you for being here. Thank you for the conversation. It's been fascinating from a number of different perspectives. My PhD is in urban planning, so I deeply understand the role that the built environment, roads, bridges, barriers, can deliberately play in perpetuating oppression. And I'd say that what I'm hearing from you is not unlike America Now, during the Civil Rights era, during the Jim Crow era, during slavery.
In the cities.
And so I have two questions for you. Why is there such, unpack a little bit, why there's such resistance and persecution to the Christian community there? So the first question, by the Israeli government. The second question, why is there such allegiance from evangelical Christians? Is it purely the strength of propaganda? Is it something else? Is it ignorance?
Yeah. Well, the first part of it is that Christians are in the eyes of the state of Israel, Palestinians are no different than Muslim Palestinians or atheist Palestinian. They're Palestinians, so they're a roadblock to the idea of a greater Israel. And you have two things going on. You know, right now, 25 years ago, when the settlements were being built, that was much more of a secular project. It was because it was the plan of the state of Israel. One hand, they're shaking hands and saying, oh yeah, we're gonna, you know, okay, it's area ABC now, but you guys are gonna have your own state. But they knew in reality, they had it all worked out. It's like take one step forward, okay, America barks a little bit, so we step back. But the general plan was to continue building the settlements, to take over and create a greater Israel, which included not only Palestine. What's going on in Lebanon and Syria are part of the same plan. It's really so in one way it's secular action, and Netanyahu represents that. But in order for him to stay in power over time, the last 20 years, because people like Ben Gvir and Smotrich, who are now in the government, they were, in 2000, they were like the outcast of Israeli society. It was not a religious zealot type nation. But now, they're in power. And Netanyahu needs their power in order for him to stay in power. So you have this ugly kind of thing going on. So as far as the targeting Christians, I would say with Netanyahu and the secular, it was just that they're Palestinian, we don't want anyone here. But what's become happening now in the last few years is very much, not only do we not just want Palestinians, we don't want those people who represent a different faith. So there is a much more targeted attack against Christians, and you're seeing it with these settler attacks on a town like Taiba, or the aggressiveness at the checkpoints like I described. So I would say that's been a change where they don't want the Christians now specifically. Yeah. Whereas before, 15 years ago, I wouldn't have said that. I would have said they just don't want Palestinians, you know, but they didn't say that openly necessarily. But now it's much more pointed against Christians. And so why the evangelicals don't understand that? Obviously, it's propaganda. And whatever, I can't speak to the theology directly, but one that so ties your Christian faith into rebuilding a temple and the importance of the state of Israel. And we saw that, to me, there's a distinction between the Israel of the Bible versus the state of Israel, and that should be understood. And then I think as a human, maybe it's been unfair, because I do occasionally watch some of these Christian channels, and the type of news they put is so distorted of reality, so that you have to break that narrative. So I think it's unfair in a way to evangelicals, because you've been fed such a distorted message. And so the only way to break that is there have been groups. There's a group called Telos Group, which was started by a man who's an Orthodox Christian from Palestine, and Todd Deathridge, who grew up in the evangelical church. And they are trying to reach out to evangelical communities and say, wait a second, there's more to the story than you know. And then at a basic level, forget the theology, just as a Christian, whatever your specific church, how do we treat our fellow brothers and sisters?
Yeah.
So whether you think, you still got to realize someone from Bethlehem in Jerusalem is still part of the land of Christ, or would jump up at Jacob's well, and shouldn't they be treated fairly? I don't know why we can't use that argument and just say, why are American tax dollars going to kill these people?
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Good morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
As I'm listening to the through line, biblical history, we see suffering. We see pain.
Yep.
The scriptures are wrought with these stories. Whether it's civil rights, Palestinian, Jew conflict. Oppression is not spontaneous. It's structural. And how are we, or in the face of all these things, how can we, those who feel oppressed or who are victimized, respond structurally to these kind of domestic issues that are continuing to do, as you say, Netanyahu wants to stay in power. This seems to be a through line. I want to stay in power. I built a structure to stay in power. Christianity, Judaism, Islam, they're not necessarily powerful because we are those things in name. There is an actual discipline of what Christianity is. And the idea that there's a sacred story attached to Israel would suggest that there is an absence of holiness in other parts of the world, complete holiness. So how do we strategically, structurally respond to a very well-developed strategy to keep people oppressed if the story of sacredness has become more political than it has become holy?
I guess my response, I'm actually going to answer with a political answer rather than, first of all, we're here in Little Rock. I know a little bit about the civil rights movement and how people respond to injustice, right? So I think first of all, it hasn't been clearly understood that the Palestinians have been treated unjustly. But once you do that, you can make the connection to the situation of blacks here in America and what they went through and how we responded. And we responded first out of our faithful hearts. Whether we're Christian or Muslim or Jew, we recognize that someone is being oppressed or persecuted, you react to that. And in America, we were able to do that through boycotts, through marches, through making your voices heard, and sometimes suffering through that, and even being killed. A parallel, where I was in Palestine when I first went to the school, we had high school girls. I remember I wanted to see if there was a translation. There's a book called Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton about South Africa. And because one thing that was lacking in Palestine, or at least I thought, was, and this was by design, because they haven't been able to create a government and have their own structure, is that there were individuals, but there really wasn't the sense of a civil society and how you act and do things. So on one side, you have in Palestine having to develop a way to respond to the oppression. But I can tell you for a fact, there have been many attempts at nonviolent resistance, just like have been practiced in America, and they were immediately, not by the bulldog, by the dogs, by Bull Connor or whatever, but by actual being shot.
Yeah.
I remember being in Bethlehem in the early 2000s, and it was a bishop and priest, and we were trying to walk from the Church of Nativity up to where the wall was being built, and there was a tank right in our face. And if we couldn't move any further. Or when I was in Bethany and they were building the wall, Jewish peace activists had come into town and others, and I had a young American visiting with me, and she wanted to join. We were going to make a march through town to the wall. You couldn't make it. They were there fully with a full army unit, and it started with the tear gas and things. And over the decades, there have been in various towns, those towns that I talked about when you're driving from the airport and look over the wall, Bilin, and Issa Amro was just here, who won a Human Rights Award. People have been practicing nonviolent resistance in Palestine. You don't hear about it. What you hear about is boys were throwing rocks, and a couple of them got shot by the Israelis. This happened every weekend. Every weekend they will have demonstrations, and they're met by violent force, and just characterized in the West as being these stone-throwing kafir terrorists doing an act, when really they're actually trying to act with nonviolent resistance. But here in America, we have to respond to that injustice the same way we would have before. Why? I don't know if you have it in Arkansas, but I believe in Texas and even in New York, why should it be against the law to ask for a boycott against Israeli products? I was a student in the 1970s in University of Michigan, and I remember marching for Stephen Biko being killed in South Africa, right? Why have we now made this that that Israel somehow can't be touched? That is not anti-Semitic. Most of the people that have been leading demonstrations are young Jews who understand that what is happening in Israel is not good for the future of the state of Israel. And not good for Jews because it's putting on this idea, because people are recognizing what the state of Israel is doing, you conflate that with the Jewish population, and that's wrong. It shouldn't be that way. And I don't accept that. So I think what has to be done is that we have to speak out and say, we have to take actions. How come we put sanctions against Russia, against Iran? Russia has done 1/10 of the things. I'm not saying it's right, but I'm not a fan of Putin, believe me, and of Russian oppression. But we find it very easy to impose sanctions on them and try to cripple their ability to act, right? Not one, there has been settlers who have been, Israel has even said, they're guilty of killing this person or doing something. And Biden put a sanction on one, and then it's lifted. So we're not using the tools that we have to help fight against the injustice.
Mother Agapia, this is a little bit of a personal question. How has the American media contributed to the insensitivity within the American Christian community about the oppression that Palestinians are suffering, to include Palestinian Christians? And I know that you have a member of your family who's in the media, and so I know I'm not trying to pick on you, but then the issue of propaganda is real, and so I ask you: has the media, or how has the media contributed, for better or for worse? And if you want to personalize it, go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very painful situation for myself, and very frustrating one. And I guess I've seen the power, whatever this force has, on the mainstream media, in my own brother. And not only my brother, I have a cousin who's actually very high up at CBS, has the ability to change the narrative, or maybe they don't, and that's the question, is why I've been very frustrated. It doesn't have to be my brother, it's all the mainstream media. Basically, they have this, they're simply not reporting the truth. First of all, why after 2 years we still don't have reporters in Gaza? And then they could come and say, so yeah, the big problem, I mean, I remember I don't watch TV that much, but when I make it a point of trying to watch when Netanyahu, or before it was John Kirby, the people in the government that were dealing with the policy, dealing with Israel. And I wanted to throw something at the TV, because they talked to these people. I can remember one interview precisely. Benjamin Netanyahu was being interviewed by my brother, and 2 days before, you saw a film of the Israeli settlers, Daniela Weiss. They were at the Gaza border blocking food trucks and throwing food out of the trucks, not letting them come into Gaza. So he asked a question about, oh, is food getting into Gaza? And Netanyahu, oh, yes, of course, we're letting truckloads in, everything's happening, and no follow-up question. And I just wanted, wait a second. We know what's really happening there. You can see it. You get the TV feed. How come you don't ask him another question about what's going on? And all I can tell you is that I tried for the last year gently to sort of say, how come you're not interviewing this person? Or why don't you ask this? And there's kind of like a no answer. They just, not even an admittance that our corporation says that we can't say these things or do it. It's just sort of, this bubble comes around them. And I think that's a danger. And you're seeing it actually, unfortunately, in the mainstream Democratic Party as well. I mean, I was so frustrated when Harris, she couldn't even allow a Palestinian delegate to speak. Where is this closure of the mind? What's entrapping the people? Or, when Shireen Abu Akleh was killed. And I remember seeing my brother not long after that. And he knows I've lived there for many. I go to the site, and I know the area. I knew exactly. It was very clear what had happened to her. If you lived there, you understood. And he's still repeating 2 months later, oh, maybe it was an accident. Maybe this happened. So I don't know how to explain it except that when you make that choice, they choose to live in that bubble and don't seek the truth. And then people can't know the truth. And thank God, for good or bad, we have the internet now, and that's where things are going to crumble, not from the mainstream media, but because people, and the brave people, those reporters that were in Gaza, and the people like Hassan Auda, the people who are getting the message out, Israel can't control that. They're trying to. They are controlling our media. That's very clear, at least on this issue. So, and what's happening now is that they're targeting. In 4 different states, the state of Israel is paying to target evangelical churches in Nevada, Colorado, Arizona, California. Go to them specifically and you use virtual reality machines and say, oh, remember God. It's like continue the one message of one day and put the fear into people's hearts as if that's the only thing that happened. And then on the other side, if you dare say something else, you're either an anti-Semite or you don't know what you're talking about. Okay, if we don't know what we're talking about in Gaza, let the reporters go in and report. And the same thing happens in the West Bank. They don't let, I remember when in the early 2000s, not just reporters, but a couple congresspeople they came to visit, and I met them on the Mount of Olives because they said they were not allowed to visit the West Bank, where I was in Bethany. It was too dangerous for them to do that. So the whole narrative is created by Israel, and you're not allowed to let people see the other side. And that was what was most special about Ta-Nehisi Coates. It's just one example of what we need to do, and one reason that I'm going around now is to tell the stories, but also say to people, you come and see. Don't be chained in by Israel and only listening to what they have to say. Come over the wall and see what real life is really like. And when you see that, then you really don't have to say anything else. Because anyone with a conscience will then understand what the problem is and realize we have to change the situation. But if you never see behind that wall, then you don't know. That's it.
Wait, Justin, then Mohammed Samad.
Thank you so very much. I really appreciate you being here, Mother Agapia, and Ali. Thank you, of course, for this whole series. So I'm an ordained Baptist pastor, so one of those, white evangelical.
Tell us what's going on.
Also, I have my apartheid hat on. So, but what I'm wanting to ask is what do you think, since people have been so thoroughly propagandized, is maybe the one or two issues that seem to stick with folks the most, that are allowing them to hold on to this, hey, let's support Israel, let's support Zionism. And then how folks like me, who have, a network of evangelical Christian friends, what are one or two or three things that we might be able to say? And I also teach religious studies at a conservative evangelical college, and so I have students coming up, and so what are 1 or 2 or 3 things that I can say to them that are the most compelling to help them hear that genocide is happening and that we have the power more than most other groups to do something about it? What do I say to them?
Well, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to get into a theological discussion. I think the main thing is, this is so hard to break, but to make them, what's pushed upon us is now Hamas, 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 and that this is a Muslim-Jewish war. And that first has to be said, that's not the case at all. I'm a Christian. I lived in a town of 99% Muslims. We had a school. We had icons and crosses in that school, and we had no problem with the Muslim community. In fact, there's great respect between the two. So I think you have to somehow find a way to break that narrative. That one, this particular issue is not based on religion, and 2, that the Muslim Christians do get along with each other and have respect for each other. And so, and then on top of that, yeah, there are Christians living here and being oppressed. And to get beyond your evangelical belief that so holds on to the state of Israel, then it's up to you to call upon the state of Israel. How come you're treating the Christians in this manner? That's what I would say to them. To make that realization, Christians are living there.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Mohammed Samara. I'm a Palestinian. I was born at a refugee camp in Jordan. So this is related to the previous question. I'm an engineer, I'm a scientist. I like to go with something that I can do, even if it's small. As you already mentioned, Israel propaganda machine is quite powerful, and they make big lies after lies and small lies. And so what I would like us to take is, what is one thing we can tell to people that would change their mind? And the Palestinian people have been suffering for so long. And I want to share this one particular story from Chris Hedges, who wrote the book on Wars That Give Us Meaning. And it's very timely because it was also about Gaza. He was in Gaza at the beach dunes, and there were these loudspeakers coming from the Israeli side. Israeli soldiers had loudspeakers, and they were uttering words in Arabic toward these kids that were playing on the dunes. So he asked, what is going on? And he was told that the loudspeakers are cursing and calling the mothers of those little boys really terrible names that will not be mentioned here. And so the little boys responded with throwing stones. And the soldiers responded with M16s with silencers on them, firing at them and shooting them to death in their head. He said in his whole entire life, he covered so many wars, he never saw such a story where children are brought into the conflict, into the war. This story does not get told. So what things we can take here that we can go to our friends, to our colleagues, to the people around, so we can at least put a little chip on this propaganda machine from Israel. Thank you.
You mean just to convey a story like the one that Chris had? Sure. I mean, right out the story. This is in the early 2000s. There was no Hamas. There was the occupation, and our school in Bethany. The Christian boarding students had their bedrooms right next to the main street, and we were under curfew. And as I look out the window, and there was an Israeli soldier whose first language was Russian, and there was a young Palestinian man walking up towards him, and he was trying to talk to him, because he didn't understand what was going on because he was deaf-mute. The Israeli soldier shot him through the eye. So he survived, but, this was early 2000s in a town that was not militant at all in Bethany. It didn't have any resistance groups there or anything, but we had jeeps in the street, soldiers there. Outside our school was a little APC, a tank, for months on end. Okay, and so this is how the reality of the treatment of Palestinians from way before the development of Hamas and the recognition of it. And so and that's just every day. I think there's just too many stories to tell. And I get the way to put it is that I don't I can tell you there's a reporter, Gideon Levy. I hope if any of you haven't heard of him, Google him. I don't know how this man continues. He's on the newspaper Haaretz, which is a liberal Israeli newspaper in English. That used to be, they started like the Times on Sunday, you read Haaretz on Friday, the magazine and everything. But since the early 2000s, he and a photographer, Alex Levac, every weekend they'll have a story about how in a Palestinian village or town, a 14-year-old boy has been killed by a sniper shot. And you just don't hear the stories. And the other illustration I make is that it was a reality in our life in Bethany of the soldiers there and indiscriminately shooting people. But another way to put it is a couple of years ago, the Russia-Ukraine war was big, and I remember the New York Times having a story about how a beer factory was turning out Molotov cocktails, and how this was something wonderful, the Ukrainian resistance fighting against the Russians. How many times did I read in the newspapers, in every town that I know of, where a boy is accused of throwing a Molotov cocktail and he's shot dead? And you never hear those stories. And the thing is, and he's not shot dead in the state of Israel. He's shot dead outside his home, right, in the West Bank. Right. So what are the Israeli troops doing there?
You made me think of another question. One, what was the reporter's name again?
Gideon Levy, Levy.
Okay. And then here, there's a narrative that our police are untrained, bumpkin, and so that's why some things happen.
Right.
Is this a matter of untrained or intentionality?
No, it's intentional. In fact, for sure what I know is intentional is that another story, where when I was still living at the convent, the Garden of Gethsemane is right there. We had the Orthodox Church, the Catholic Church, and the church would employ young men, especially because when you had pilgrims, a lot of people coming, young men, Palestinian men would be there sort of just being around, helping at the church. And I called him Belgium because I couldn't remember his first name. But one day he saw and always the soldiers would be at the bottom of the hill there at the Mount of Olives because it leads right to Al-Aqsa Mosque, and especially on a Friday, because they would inhibit who could go into the mosque. A lot of times they put prohibitions. Any man under 50 could not come to even get within an area of the mosque. And this happens all the time. And anyway, this one time, he saw the soldiers beating on another person, and he ran over there, and they purposely shot him in the knee. And I'm sure there's many cases where they know exactly what they're doing. And when you talk about being trained or untrained, the fact is, I mean, you can find this, is that many American U.S. police departments have gone and trained in Israel. Yes. So this is actually something that we really should tie in with what's going on with the immigration policy and with ICE. We're learning the tactics of Israel.
Yes.
And that actually goes back even to sensitive topic, but 9/11 in 2001, the first Homeland Security chief was Michael Chertoff, who was an Israeli citizen.
Yep.
So we could go on a lot about this, and I think you've had other people talk about the Palestinian laboratory and how the development of the checkpoints has grown over the years with facial recognition, with the control of a population. So this is a sophisticated methods that the Israelis have, not country bumpkins.
Yeah, great question. This is very deliberate, and you don't have to take this from me. Former Israeli soldiers have finally came out and put their hands together and said, we can't take this anymore. So there's a breaking the silence movement for Israelis, soldiers. In fact, about a year ago, they did a tour of many university and college campuses here and in Canada. And they can tell you really, it's hard for me to say this without choking, with the details what we have done to the Palestinians.
Yeah. One positive thing for them, when I was in Palestine this last time, I met in Ramallah with Suli Khatib, who actually, as a young boy, he had had directed violence against Israeli soldiers. 14-year-old, put in prison for 10 years, but now he works with the combatants for peace, with the soldiers on the other side breaking the silence, and they're trying to bridge the gap. It's very minuscule, but there are individuals in Israel and Palestine that recognize the problem and are trying to find the commonality between the two. Because of the violence both of them suffered, and recognizing that and trying to work towards something better. But I think also that's a really big thing to hit on as a politician here in America, is the real critical connection between Israeli policies and what they're trying to institute here in America right now, in the vision. There's a very clear connection.
In 2015, December 2015, 10 years ago now, almost, I was part of a group of people that went to Israel and Palestine. People from the Senator Proctor Conference and from the Defenders Group, Young Defenders Group went to Palestine. We met with people who were breaking silence. Some young Israeli soldiers who were breaking silence movements, who told us that they were trained to target children. I saw with my own eyes children being tear gassed.
Oh, yeah.
This was in the West Bank. They were not tear gassed in Israel, they were tear gassed in Palestine. They were tear gassed in their own neighborhood by Israeli soldiers. Because I'm a former soldier, I know what tear gas is, okay? And quite frankly, when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, in 2014, text messages came on what was then Twitter to protesters in Ferguson from Palestine,
Yeah, Corey pushed him.
telling the protesters, this is how you respond to tear gas, not with water,
Onions.
but with milk. With milk. Black Lives Matters, you recall, moved out of the Michael Brown situation. And the relationship between the young people in Palestine and the West Bank and BLM was strong. You now know why BLM was targeted as a terrorist group. You now know why the same people who call BLM a terrorist group target Hamas. There was no Hamas before 2002 or 3. Hello? The U.S. created the reason for Hamas. But to your point, the militarization of the Israeli people and young soldiers is the same militarization we saw in the United States Police Forces. Last point. The same thing we see in Israel and in Palestine has a new name called ICE. Because the same tactics that are being used in Palestine against Palestinians are now being used in Portland and Washington and in other places, and Americans are not connecting the dots. So let's be real about this, okay? We don't have to talk about the blackout of the Israelis on Palestinians. I mean, there's a blackout. But we don't believe our own eyes. And we won't step up. The last thing I'll say is, if that was happening to young evangelical white folks, there'd be a lot of protesting. But because this is happening to people who are protesting on behalf of immigrants or Palestinians, I mean, remember, the police took out tear gas and pepper sprayed Columbia protesters who were protesting the attacks on Gaza. And that was what we had the University President's pillory for. So Mother Agapia is telling us the truth. We just don't want to get up off our see past and get involved.
But so, I think too, I have come to, I was at Columbia just last week. It's much worse than that. The groups that were leading the protests last year are now illegal on campus. Jewish Voice for Peace has been suspended. Mohsen Madawi was a Palestinian student who was detained in Vermont. I was at his court case in New York because the government's still trying to pursue. And so they're reaching to the vulnerable first. I mean, all people who are in cities that were part of the civil rights movement, and they are the ones who should really be speaking out, because our rights are getting cut off little by little. And I'm really almost depressed. I was at University of Rochester, I was at Cornell, I lived 20 miles away.
Yes.
I went to just a purely Orthodox Christian fellowship, and they were nervous about Christians in the Holy Land was the title of the talk, to have me talk on campus to register it. There's such a reticence and a fear by young college students. And I understand it, especially for foreign ones on student visas. They're much more vulnerable, or even a student, they're afraid of the repercussions if they say or do anything. So what is that saying about the United States? When we're afraid to talk, when we're not legally not allowed to take part in actions that were so part of our country and the civil rights movement.
Should we take the last question?
So, thank you, because I'm from Jerusalem and I can relate quite a bit to the stories that you're sharing with us. You know, the justification was in 1948, the land did not have but shepherds living on it. It was land without people, and there were people without land. And then you think about, I was just going through some of the movies on Netflix, and there's an advertisement, I haven't watched the movie yet, but it shows a group of ladies who were part of the American Army, black women, part of the American Army, and the actress is just mad at her superior and saying, do you know that basically that they are accusing that the African American soldiers, females, have tails, and they justify the attack on the black people. So it is the dehumanization of certain groups of people that allows them to feel superior, to justify whatever they do to other groups of people. So you look at the definition of apartheid and what does it mean? Or you look at the definition of a Jewish state. What does that mean? It means only one race to control, if not exclusive, in the land where nobody else lives.
Right.
And I think it is the misinformation, the dehumanization, the justification for the action that they do, and that's what we have to be aware of. It's not a wall, it's a fence. It's not a settlement,
Right.
it's a neighborhood. It's not people, it's savages. It's not children, it's future terrorists. And that's, I think you hit it on target when you said ignorance, and it is the political affiliation, and the political affiliation for me to be able to live what we do, I have to turn a blind eye on a bunch of things.
You're right about the dehumanization, and I think that's what one thing, I didn't expect anything when I had that interview with Tucker. I'm just a nun, but I think what struck a chord is that I could speak for the people who don't have a voice, and to make people see that Palestinians are people just like you and I, and to humanize them in a way that they haven't been, break that narrative. But I just want to add one thing. It's just another piece of information that almost, this oppression has been so strong that you almost don't think about it. I mentioned Shireen Abu Akleh. She was killed in a Jenin refugee camp,
Yes.
and to the 3 kilometers away is a church of St. George where
Yes.
Christ healed the 10 lepers.
Yeah.
8 miles away was the community in Zavabti that I know that has the Christian church, and I'm supporting the people there. every year I would go back to the site where she was killed, and there was a large tree there, and people would leave posters and flowers and memorials. We tried to go this year, and we couldn't even get, I'm not sure if it was actually the site, because this is another quiet, it's sort of like a silent killer. People think now, oh, there's a little bit of relief in Gaza, they have something to eat, there's a ceasefire, and we don't really hear much even what's happening in the West Bank, the olive trees and that, okay. But worse than that, I call it a silent killer because the occupation is continuing,
Yes.
not just the settlements, but this is displacement within the West Bank.
Yes.
In Jenin, the refugee camp now, 8,000 people, they say up to 40,000 between the towns of Tulkarm and Jenin. The Israelis have gone in and forced the people out.
Right.
So in the town of Burkine, there are now people living with other people, or they're living in community centers, or at the Arab American University, there's people from the Jenin refugee camp that no longer have their home.
Right.
And to show the kind of destruction that they do, I went with the same priest. He was a little fearful. I'm not really afraid, but you do have to be afraid, because we tried to drive to the spot, this is in September, where Shireen had been killed, and as we were approaching it, you see some houses destroyed and sort of the road ripped up. And I came to a location, and I think it might have been where she had been killed, but you can't tell because the buildings were leveled. So I'll need to get my phone did not connect to the location, so I'm not sure if it's the actual spot, but my point is that thousands of people in the northern West Bank are no longer at their homes now, and if you try to approach, the week that we were there, talk about the sniper shot, 2 young boys, younger than 14, were trying to go into the camps to try to go to their homes that were left and try to get some clothes or some things, and there were Israelis are in there, and they were shot dead. And that's happening every day there, and we don't hear about it at all in America. Or you hear it sort of in the, a YouTube thing, the Max Blumenthal or something, some program. But the Americans, and so then you wonder, if you're going to hear about an attack in Israel now, God forbid, I don't want it to happen, but what do you think that young kid in Jenin is thinking right now? He doesn't, his home, they're living in some sort of refugee center away from their refugee camp. And the Israelis there are ready to attack him. I was there a year ago in September for the wedding of that priest Daoud, and 4 miles away in the town of Kabatia, Israeli soldiers had gone after what they said were militants. And that afternoon, we're getting ready for the wedding at 6 o'clock that evening, we hear the Israeli soldiers had cornered these 4 men, were killing them, and they were at the school, the elementary school. They had tear gassed the school, and the kids were not being allowed out while they were carrying out this operation. And then we hear, not only did they kill them, this is when Al Jazeera, the news reporters in the West Bank, that Saturday they were banned from Jerusalem because they showed film. The Israeli soldiers had not only killed the 4 guys, but they were on top of a 4-story building, and they kicked them off the roof. Whether they were still alive or not, we don't know. The wedding was taking place that day, and they weren't sure whether they were going to have it or have the reception. They ended up doing it, but this just shows the brutality of the Israeli occupation that's going on to this day, and we hear nothing about it.
Ollie?
Okay, go ahead, George. Yeah, George, sorry. We get last question.
Really
We keep going, last question. This reminds me of being in church where the pastor says, I keep going to my seat, I'm about to close. I'm going to my seat.
Go ahead, Joe.
I hope I asked this question correctly. I tried to have a conversation some years ago with a relative of mine who's an evangelical Christian. And something that you said earlier really struck a chord with me. You were mentioning how for the zealots who are determined for greater Israel to come into existence, that anything that's an impediment to that becomes the enemy. And what I found in trying to have a conversation with this person is that this mindset that if the temple doesn't get built, if the Al-Aqsa Mosque isn't demolished, and if greater Israel isn't restored, that the Messiah won't come back. That Jesus can't just choose on his own. I tried to have
If you tear down this temple, in 3 days I'll rebuild it. That's a
Yes.
biblical verse, right?
Yeah. So I realized that I was dealing with a whole different mindset
Yeah.
about what it means to be a Christian. And I didn't know how to have the conversation anymore, and so I just quit.
Yeah.
But one thing I realized was that Jesus and his message was out of the equation.
That's the second.
And so, your thoughts, how do you have that conversation?
Well, that's why I'm not sure they can really have a theological one.
No.
You have to do it on a person, but if they have a Christian conscience of any kind, I think that's really what you have to get back to, is reflect on what your theology is telling you. And do you think is rebuilding the temple and supporting Israel worth the cost of killing all these people? And wiping out a, would Jesus do that? Would Jesus do that? You know, and so, and in fact, there's many well, you had Miko Pellet here, right?
Yes.
I think his point, well, that'll go off on a tangent, but I think that's it. These obstacles of faith for people, when it becomes that, I'm not sure you can do it by, that you have to do through prayer. Because it's sort of a delusion is how I see it, and I'm not sure that words gonna make someone like that change their mind. You can try. I actually have a woman who lives with us who her family are all evangelicals, and she showed them films and told about what I've said, and they, oh well, but you know, where's your scripture that says this sort of thing? Well, our scripture says to, you know, against the unrighteousness of thing and against persecuting people, so at least start from that foundation. Is this the way Jesus would really operate to create the temple again? It's by killing it off people. I mean, I don't really know what else.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I'm trying
One last
to respect those who have been waiting to ask questions, but I'm trying to also respect the time of those who need to be. So, young lady, and then this, and this will be the last two questions. Okay? I'm trying to be fair, all right? I'm not trying to suppress, but I do want to respect Mother Agapia too.
I'm happy, but I mean, people have other things to do. That's it.
Hi, Mother Agapia. Thank you so much for being here. You're a very eloquent speaker, and we're learning a lot. My name is Tristine. I'm with Little Rock Peace for Palestine. I do some of the outreach. But my question, well, first I wanted to kind of talk about the two-state solution, and I was curious what your thoughts on that, whether it's really just a distraction, whether it's unworkable, and you know, just a way for Israel to continue their colonization of the West Bank, because even as, you know, from the Oslo Accords, having, you know, the West Bank and Gaza as part of Palestinian territories, there have been over, I think, from the 1991 to 2014, there have been almost doubled the amount of settlers that have grown from 230,000 to 560,000. Or something like that, and then so it's kind of creating, you know, all these colonies in the West Bank and turning it into Swiss cheese. So realistically, you know, when we talk about like the parallels of South African apartheid and how that had to be completely dismantled, why is it so, you know, taboo to talk about how we need to dismantle completely the Israeli apartheid genocidal regime, and what your thoughts are on the two-state solution?
Yeah, well, the reality, I mean, I'm not a politician, I don't want to go down that way too much, but just as a witness there, the reality is that, and it's a lie for any person who's aware of the situation, when you talk about the Congress people and things, that they have to know on the ground, there's no way to have two states right now. Because, and certainly in the last year, Israel has so built up, they're creating Bantustans. In reality is that all the spaces between the metropolitan areas, they're clearing out the Bedouins, they're clearing out but that doesn't mean I don't want to advocate any particular solution. The first step is simply to recognize that it's an occupation and it needs a political solution. And whether that ends up becoming a federation or a confederation of you know, one state but with sort of two ruling parties or something, that's not really the issue. Because also the other thing is that most of the settlers, and it's increased to nearly 750,000 now, are there due to economic reasons. The loud ones are the zealot, the religious zealot, who are dangerous. And dangerous because they control the Israeli government now as well. But in reality, you could talk about a political solution, because all those beautiful settlement houses they built, okay, if you want two states, they could be occupied by Palestinians. I've driven every inch of Israel and the West Bank in all the work that I've done with the pilgrimage or working with the kids and stuff. Believe me, there's enough land to move those 750 settlers into what's now recognized as the state of Israel. Okay, so it could be done, but the first step is just that there has to, but right now the reality on the ground is not that at all for a two-state solution. But the first thing has to be is to recognize that we need a solution. And what Israel is really saying now is that we don't want two states, right? They even say, so they don't, what they really were saying with that is that we don't want the Palestinians here. We don't even want to make any kind of agreement with them. So whether it's two-state or bicameral or whatever it is, that's not the point. The point is, are you going to recognize that these people are here, and how are you going to deal with it? Or are you going to continue the apartheid state, and is the world going to let them do that? Because I can tell you too, the next step will be little Gazas.
Yeah.
If they got away with it, they got away with now. The way that they're subdividing everything within the West Bank now, not because most of those settlers, if you gave them money, the people who live in like Mali Adamim and Ariel, they're there. I know for a fact. Many Russians even. It's because of economic incentives. They're allowed. So if you told them your house is now going to be over on the other side of the Green Line, they would move, except for those zealots, which unfortunately have become more and more into power.
Yes.
So I think the thing is not a question of what kind of solution it's going to be, is that are we going to work towards a solution instead of perpetuating the problem? That's really what it's about. And I think that's where we have to tell our American congresspeople and to people in the state of Israel, do you want to continue to live like this? Another thing when I say is that there's a story to tell. I've gone through a generation now. Girls that I knew that were 10 years old, and I'd sit at their home and we have bullet casings in the ashtray because of all the fighting that's gone in the area, and they can tell you from the sounds what kind of missile is coming. They have kids now. And also on the Israeli side, they have kids now, and why do you want to keep perpetuating this violence? And the reason that the violence can continue is because America allows Israel to do it, both
Right.
with our money and with our diplomatic cover.
Right.
And until that changes, nothing's going to change. So my point, you don't even need to talk about what kind of solution. We have to say that we need a solution and make it happen.
So, Ms. Lyons, do you have one last question? And then we will be done after that. Doctor's orders.
Just pull it out. There you go.
Okay, is it on?
Yes, it's on.
Okay. Thank you for being here. I don't have the experience that you do, of course. I got to live in Israel for just a month. It was in 1986, and the problem goes back even way before that. When I was there, I lived in the old town, the old city of Jerusalem, in the Greek Catholic Patriarchate, and I got to spend an afternoon with the mayor of Bethlehem. He had just been invited to go to the UN to speak. This was 1986. The Israelis did not let him out of the country to speak to the UN. I saw orchards that were, olive orchards that had been plowed under. I saw a hospital right outside Jerusalem whose top floor had been blown off because the Israelis thought there were terrorists in it. There were little kids. And I could cite other instances. So my point is, it goes back way, way back, even before 1986. My question, please, is that I'm ordained in a large denominational church here. I'm asking you as a holy woman, how do I speak, this is personal, how do I speak to my sister-in-law, who's a Zionist, a rabid Zionist, in love? Because my personal belief is Christ is not coming back, the Messiah is not returning in war, but in peace. And the kingdom is not going to be ushered in with war, but in peace. And my obligation is to speak peace. And if I'm right, your Greek, the Greek part of your name comes from agape, meaning filial love. So I'm asking you as a holy woman, how do I speak the truth to someone who's a rabid Zionist in love?
Just true.
It can't be in just strict theological terms. It can't be an argument. And I realize I have to approach it in prayer.
Well, with prayer and with action, like, as a nun, I'm in church, supposed to be in church, 7 hours a day, plus in your cell. So we have a cycle of services, and we always read the 83rd Psalm, or 84th, I think, and 85th. And mercy and truth are met together, righteousness and peace have kissed each other.
Yeah.
So I think for people who put their importance in Scripture and the Bible, go back to the Bible and say to them to reflect on the words there. And as a nun, there's twofold. One, that, so mercy and truth are met together. So as a Christian, you're supposed to act with mercy towards others, and through that you'll learn the truth. So if they had a merciful heart towards what's happening to the Palestinians, Christian or Muslim, they would want to know the truth and act that the truth would come out, right? And more than the truth, that righteousness would appear. And righteousness means a fair solution that lets people being able to live in peace. So, and as a nun, too, I shouldn't be doing this. Like I said, the first year I was in the Holy Land, I was in my cell. And as an Orthodox Christian, mostly monastics don't go out in the world, work in a school or a hospital or anything. I was an unusual case. But when your conscience is pricked, when you've seen something and you've been there, so that's out of love. You're there as a witness to say, I've seen this with my eyes. I've seen what's happened to the Christians there. So I'm speaking to you just as a witness. And you know what the Greek word for witness is? Martyria, a martyr. So sometimes we have to be martyred. We're not going to be literally killed, but you're going to suffer by proclaiming that witness. So don't be afraid of that, I guess is what I'm saying, is that there may be a reaction that you don't really want, but if you speak from your heart with love about what you saw, then we can only hope that that's what's going to reach the other person's heart.
Thank you.
Thank you. So please join me in thanking Mother Agapia for visiting and speaking for joining us. Thank you very much.
Again, thank you for coming to this bit of information. First of all, there is food left over from breakfast, and Dr. Khan, Nora has left to-go boxes over there with waters, and so please go out. They're cleaned up, but there are to-go boxes there, and so please go by and get them to go. Secondly, mark your calendars, please mark your calendars for December 7th. December 7th at 4 p.m. December 7th at 4 p.m. Peter Beinart will be here at New Millennium Church again. And he was at St. Paul not St. Paul, at Palestine Heights in the summer. Tristan, please, you share the information.
Not with, about Peter Beinart, but Dr. Yusuf tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, I was going to say that, thank you, but I think Dr. Yusuf was here.
Judge, please switch your mics. It's not on.
Do you want this? Switch it on here.
Is that better?
Thank you.
Thank you. I thought I was loud enough. You heard the December 7th announcement, right?
Yes.
Do I need to repeat the December 7th announcement?
Please.
Okay, for the live stream, December 7th, 4 p.m. at this location, Peter Beinart will be here again. He was here earlier. He was in Little Rock earlier in Little Rock, East Palestine, heading in the summer at Palestine Heights. He's going to be here in the church. And please come by. I know that it'll be 4 p.m. I know we close the door, but please, we want to have you here. Now, Christine, please come and share about our music tomorrow.
And also, if you want to add to your calendar, Dr. Youssef, who he's a Little Rock internist and pediatrician who has done 2 medical missions in Gaza now. He will speak at the St. Mark's Episcopal Church tomorrow at 6 p.m. Oh, he was here today. Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, yes. So if you already know this, sorry for being repetitive. Okay. Tomorrow at 6 p.m. at St. Mark's Episcopal.
Would you please give a round of applause for Little Rock Peace of Palestine